Good morning slash afternoon starting out solitary. This week is week 102 and we are talking about the element of fire. So, as a fire elemental, I am an Aries with an Aries. We are generally perceived, and Leos and Sagittarius have the same problem. We're generally perceived as really bold, as really passionate, as not taking other things into consideration. Some of that's true. But fire is also creativity and drive and desire. The way that like flames dance kind of creates its own world. And while we talked about water or air, not water's next week. What we've talked about air kind of being the bridge between the thought realm and the physical realm. Fire is, that's my alarm. Fire is that manifestation of all of that drive and desire, and it's so combustible. Another thing that I find really extremely interesting about fire is that fire cannot exist without the other elements. Like, earth doesn't need any input to be earth, and air doesn't need any input to be air, and water is water. However, fire is not a natural element. It has to be created. It has to have input from the other elements. So in a way, fire is dependent on the other elementals. So one of the things that is generally accepted, at least in the northern hemisphere, is that fire is sometimes replaced for the guardian of the south. That's its meaning. And there are a lot of other things that have fire attributes. So like carnelian and citrine, and a lot of the stones that are red or are made under extreme pressure are listed as fire crystals, or that have attributes of crystals. And then there are, of course, the herbals that have their attributes of fire as well. And to see that within each of these elements is entirely interesting to me. So some of the plants that are considered associations of fire have a passion and a power behind them, and usually they're pretty spicy, and they have a strong taste, and it can go either way as far as like bitter or sweet. Some of those plants are like angelica, hawthorn, rosemary, basil, garlic, the ones that like kind of kick you. Nettle, rue, and personally I consider yarrow a flower plant, a fire plant. It's obviously a flower plant. So for me, when working with those plants, I generally thank the guardian of the south for the ability to harvest those plants. Hold on, I have a cat. Sorry. He's decided that he's gonna sit on all of my paper. So we've talked about plants, we've talked about crystals. And I think that in Western astrology, we tend to think of people by their signs. And with fire signs being cardinal, we're very fixed. We're a little unyielding. We can't help it. And so I think that's indicative though of our guardian. And another thing is that I mean, we're ruled by some pretty heavy hitters as far as the passion, the desire, as far as planetary elements. We have Mars, the Sun, and Pluto, respectively. For those of you who are unaware, Aries are ruled by Mars, Leos are ruled by the Sun, and Sagittarius are ruled by Pluto. Although I didn't remember that until I looked it up for something a little bit ago, and it explained so much about all my Sagittarius friends. So some other things. The season that is primarily attributed to fire is summer. Noon, the solar plexus. Now, for those of you who are interested in archangels and their associations, this is one I always thought was really interesting. So the Archangel Michael, or the Defender, is associated with the fire element. I always thought that was interesting. So, alchemetically, I think that's a word. We're going to make it a word. Alchemetically. The symbol that is attributed to fire is the triangle. And it is the upward triangle above your head. You can't see that. Whee! Colors are going to be white, red, gold, fuchsia, scarlet, beautiful things like that. There are tons of gods and goddesses that are attributed to fire. So many that I'm not going to go into them, but I mean, it's pretty extensive. So something else that I find really interesting is dream analysis and dream association. And so I was looking up in my references the associations with fire in dreams. And sometimes that can be passion or lust or the desire to change things in a real tangible way. The other thing that it signals is destruction. So if like there's a fire and it takes out your house, or there's a fire and it rains, or like the fire is being put out some way, sometimes that is a signal that the passion or the desire has fled, and a major change is coming as far as that change to your desire and what your outcome is to be. So now that I've rambled on, I hope that makes sense to you guys, and I will see you guys next week when we talk about water.